Hello, I'm David Lindsley. You may not have heard my name before, but you probably are familiar with some of the artwork I've done. This painting of Brother Joseph is often used by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and is my most well-known painting. I have painted dozens of other religious paintings over the last 40-plus years, including a few scenes from the Book of Mormon, such as this Behold Your Little Ones. This video is for anyone who has a strong testimony of the Book of Mormon, or not. For anyone who may be questioning if the Book of Mormon is a true account, or not. Or anyone that thinks there is no proof to show that it happened anywhere, so it must be a fairy tale, or written as an allegory, or not. Whatever your thoughts about the Book of Mormon, please continue watching and I'll relate to you my story of discovery about information that really made a positive change in my study and testimony. For many years, I assumed that this is where the Nephites lived, and these were their cities, and this was their writing. While painting some scenes from the Book of Mormon, I didn't understand how the Mayan culture matched the Nephites, but I casually accepted it. On this one, I painted the stone pyramids to place the Nephite children in Central America. Then, in 2009, friends introduced us to information, including physical evidences, scriptures, and quotes from prophets, that totally made sense to me and re-energized my testimony of the Book of Mormon. In this overview, I present some of the most significant points that impacted me. I believe that the Book of Mormon is an actual history of great civilizations that lived and died. So if it's true, where did it take place? There are many theories. Are there any statements from church leaders? Yes, there are. In his book, Doctrines of Salvation, published in 1954, President Joseph Fielding Smith had this to say: "Within recent years, there has arisen among certain students of the Book of Mormon a theory to the effect that within the period covered by the Book of Mormon, the Nephites and Lamanites were confined almost entirely within the borders of the territory comprising Central America and the southern portion of Mexico. This modernistic theory of necessity, in order to be consistent, must place the waters of Ripley-Ancum and the hill Cumorah someplace within the restricted territory of Central America, notwithstanding the teachings of the Church to the contrary for upwards of 100 years. Because of this theory, some members of the Church have become confused and greatly disturbed in their faith in the Book of Mormon. It is for this reason that evidence is here presented to show that it is not only possible that these places could be located as the Church has held during the past century, but that in very deed such is the case. From all the evidence in the Book of Mormon, augmented by the testimony of the prophet Joseph Smith, these final battles took place in the territory known as the United States and in the neighborhood of the Great Lakes and hills of western New York. Joseph Smith wrote a letter to answer questions about the Book of Mormon. Joseph lived in Illinois at the time and clearly stated which country the descendants of the Lamanites lived in. They were principally Israelites. Of the descendants of Joseph, the Jaredites were destroyed about the time that the Israelites came from Jerusalem, who succeeded them in the inheritance of the country. The principal nation of the second race fell in battle towards the close of the 4th century. The remnant are the Indians that now inhabit this country. In 1833, Joseph Smith penned a letter to the editor of the American Revivalist, in which he described the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon is a record of the forefathers of our western tribes of Indians. By it, we learn that our western tribes of Indians are descendants from that Joseph that was sold into Egypt, and that the land of America is a promised land unto them. Let's look how Lehi's family could have arrived in what is now the United States of America. The ocean currents took Lehi's family around Africa and sent them westward. Instead of landing in Central America, though, there is evidence that they landed further north, in or around present-day Florida. What is this evidence? Let's start with this map from 1894, which shows the thousands of documented Indian burial mounds throughout the eastern half of the United States. These mounds were not created by the current indigenous tribes, but by people that long predated them. The archaeological record places artifacts found in the mounds in Florida as the oldest at about 550 BC. The next older ones in the Mississippi Valley, and the most recent ones up in the Great Lakes at about 400 AD. This culture, known to archaeologists as the Hopewell, apparently moved northward and then eastward. The timeline matches the Book of Mormon record. There is a proposed location for the Nephites called the Heartland Model, which places the 1,000-year history recorded in the Book of Mormon in the large geographic area of the eastern half of the United States. It's likely that the large rivers such as the Mississippi, Ohio, and Tennessee form natural boundaries between the lands described in Scripture. Let's see how this may have looked. Starting at the bottom of the map, Lehi and his family arrived in the land of first inheritance in approximately 589 BC. The oldest artifacts identified as Hopewell are here, dated to about 550 BC. The early Nephites moved northward after the separation from Laman and Lemuel and settled in the land of Nephi around the year 580 BC. They remained there for centuries. Sometime between 323 BC and 180 BC, the Nephites left the land of Nephi and migrated to the northwest, where they discovered the land of Zarahemla and joined with the Mulekites who had previously settled the area. The Lamanites took over the land of Nephi from that time on. At about 90 BC, the Nephites expanded to the east and called it the land of Bountiful, it bordering a large sea or lake. The Nephite nation at this time principally included the combined large lands of Zarahemla and Bountiful. Let's look at physical evidence of habitations in a portion of the land of Bountiful. As the United States expanded westward from the original 13 colonies, interest in settling the frontier grew. In 1848, the Smithsonian Institution commissioned Ephraim Squire and Edwin Davis to survey the ancient earthquakes that were widely discovered throughout the Ohio Valley and adjacent areas. The team performed careful measurements, sketched each earthwork as it appeared, often with cross-section views to show height and depth, and included a written description of the site. The region surveyed primarily focused on Ohio, Indiana, and Tennessee, and did not extend west of the Mississippi River or into the Deep South. A landmark in American scientific research, it was the study of the prehistoric indigenous mound builders of North America. It contained 306 pages, 48 lithographed maps and plates, and 207 illustrations. In 1849, Ephraim Squire also published Aboriginal Monuments of New York. This volume contains surveys of earthworks in New York State around Lake Ontario. It demonstrated the same level of detail as the previous work for the Smithsonian. In the surveys, there were 3 different types of enclosures found. The first are large areas fortified with ditches and embankments. Second, large areas of circle and square shapes that were not fortified. And third, very small fortified areas that appear constructed simply, maybe very quickly. Also shown here is a standard 300-foot long football field for size reference. Here are 4 of the many defensive enclosures documented around present-day Ohio. These are large, heavily fortified enclosures, up to 145 acres in size. Many of them have an obvious boundary of a ditch next to a raised embankment around the perimeter, and are usually constructed along natural bluffs and waterways. This is exactly the way Captain Moroni fortified Nephite cities, as described in the Book of Mormon, circa 72 BC. In Alma 48, verse 8, we read, "Yea, he had been strengthening the armies of the Nephites, throwing up banks of earth round about to enclose his armies, and also building walls of stone to encircle them about, round about their cities and the borders of their lands, yea, all round about the land." Let's look more at those ditches and embankments. In Alma 50, verse 1, "And now it came to pass that Moroni caused that his armies should commence in digging up heaps of earth round about all the cities throughout all the land which possessed by the Nephites." In Alma 49:18, "Now behold, the Lamanites could not get into their forts of security because of the highness of the bank which had been thrown up, and the depth of the ditch which had been dug round about." This illustration shows the original depth and shape of the berms as opposed to how they appear today after centuries of erosion. "And upon the top of these ridges of earth he caused that there should be timbers, yea, works of timbers built up to the height of a man, round about the cities. And he caused that upon those works of timbers there should be a frame of pickets built upon the timbers round about, and they were strong and high. And he caused towers to be erected that overlooked those works of pickets, and he caused places of security to be built upon those towers, that the stones and the arrows of the Lamanites could not hurt them. Thus Moroni did prepare strongholds against the coming of their enemies round about every city in all the land. The wall structures have long since disappeared, and erosion has diminished the berms and ditches, but evidence was plentiful in the 1800s, as recorded by the surveyors. The surveyors found many examples of a ditch and wall combination around the enclosures. Stay with me for a minute while I show some examples, just to give you an idea of the great effort and organization this culture put into making these defensive places. Notice ditch on the outside and wall on the inside. Same with this one. This one has a double wall with a ditch in between. 2 walls and 2 ditches. Wall and ditch. Although most earthworks have been plowed over or towns and roads constructed over them, a few remnants of the embankments can still be seen today. Here is the Hopeton earthwork in Chillicothe, Ohio. The original 1846 survey and the aerial photo taken in 1938 still show prominent outlines. But today it is only visible using LiDAR imaging. After centuries of warfare between the Nephites and Lamanites, the Book of Mormon describes Jesus Christ visiting the people in about 34 AD. How did his teachings change them? In 4th Nephi, chapter 1, we read, "There were no robbers, nor murderers, neither were there Lamanites, nor any manner of ites, but they were in one, the children of Christ, and heirs to the kingdom of God. And how blessed were they, and there was no contention in all the land. The second category of earthworks was called sacred enclosures by the surveyors. Even in 1846, they realized that these ancient remnants were different than others they had surveyed. They found 14 nearly identical enclosures in close proximity to each other in present-day southern Ohio near Chillicothe. Here is a sampling of 4 of them. They have similar circular and square shapes and are all the same size, with the squares being 27 acres each. Archaeologists have not found evidence of habitation within the shapes. Therefore, they may have been ceremonial and were obviously very important to have been constructed so precisely. Unlike the places of defense throughout the Mississippi Valley, these very large areas were not fortified with walls and ditches or watchtowers. I believe that these were built during the years of peace following Christ's appearance in Bountiful, when fortifications were unnecessary because all the people were united. Among the unfortified earthworks is a particular one with unusual shapes. Squire and Davis documented with great detail this unusual work in southern Ohio. Outlined in red, you can see what looks very much like a Hebrew oil lamp. The lower half appears to be a 9-candle Hebrew menorah. Finding the ancient earthwork that appears to have ties to Hebrew symbols was probably uncomfortable to the Smithsonian and brought up questions no one wanted to answer. Then, in 1928, the Army Corps of Engineers obliterated this entire site. Looking again at the Book of Mormon timeline, in about 200 AD, the Nephites and Lamanites divided apart and wars resumed on and off for decades. In 350 AD, after many defeats in battles in Zarahemla and Bountiful, the Nephites fled to the land northward, also known by them as the Land of Desolation. In 385 AD, the Nephites made their final stand in the land of Cumorah, near the hill Cumorah, south of Lake Ontario in present-day New York. The third type of enclosure described in the surveys are all around the southern side of Lake Ontario in New York State. This is a group of 28 small fortifications, and here I showed just 6 of those 28. Let's see how these small enclosures may fit into the Nephite history. Zooming in, we see that the hill Cumorah is situated right in the center of these enclosures. Could these be Nephite encampments prior to the last great battle? In Mormon 6:2, we read, "And I, Mormon, wrote an epistle unto the king of the Lamanites, and desired of him that he would grant unto us that we might gather together our people unto the land of Cumorah, by a hill which was called Cumorah, and there we could give them battle." I had heard some people believe there are 2 hill Cumorahs, trying to reconcile a Central American geography with the location of the hill in New York. Then I learned what modern-day apostles have directly taught. Way back in 1953, Elder Mark E. Peterson of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles had this to say: "I do not believe that there were 2 hill Cumorahs, one in Central America and the other one up in New York, for the convenience of the prophet Joseph Smith, so that the poor boy would not have to walk clear to Central America to get the gold plates." Another apostle, Marion G. Romney, said this in 1975. "In the western part of the state of New York, near Palmyra, is a prominent hill known as the Hill Cumorah. As I stood on the crest of that hill, my mind reverted to the events which occurred in that vicinity some 25 centuries ago, events which brought to an end the great Jaredite nation. This second civilization to which I refer, the Nephites, flourished in America between 600 BC and AD 400. Their civilization came to an end for the same reason at the same place." I believe our apostles, who have clearly identified the Hill Cumorah in New York State as the actual site of the destruction of the Jaredites and centuries later, the Nephites. What else do we know about the Hill Cumorah? In Mormon chapter 6, verse 6, I, Mormon, made this record out of the plates of Nephi, and hid up in the Hill Cumorah all the records which had been entrusted to me by the hand of the Lord, save it were these few plates which I gave unto my son Moroni. Are there any testimonies that support this scripture? Did the Hill Cumorah have more than just the gold plates hidden in it? President Brigham Young said this: when Joseph got the plates, the angel instructed him to carry them back to the Hill Cumorah, which he did. Oliver says that when Joseph and Oliver went there, the hill opened, and they walked into a cave in which there was a large and spacious room. He says he did not think at the time whether they had the light of the sun or artificial light, but that it was just as light as day. They laid the plates on a table. It was a large table that stood in the room. Under this table there was a pile of plates as much as 2 feet high, and there were altogether in this room more plates than probably many wagon loads. They were piled up in the corners and along the walls. The first time they went there, the sword of Laban hung upon the wall, but when they went again, it had been taken down and laid upon the table across the gold plates. It was unsheathed, and on it was written these words: This sword will never be sheathed again until the kingdoms of this world become the kingdom of our God and his Christ. I tell you this as coming not only from Oliver Cowdery, but others who were familiar with it and who understood it just as well as we understand coming to this meeting. Don Carlos Smith was a young man of as much veracity as any young man we had, and he was a witness to these things. Samuel Smith saw some things, Hiram saw a good many things, but Joseph was the leader. What other physical evidences are there for the Nephite nation to have been in America? Let's look at some of the physical artifacts that have been recovered and documented since the early 1800s. Throughout the 19th century, as pioneers journeyed westward and settled the new frontier, farmers working their fields would often find various items buried in the earth, even remnants of foundations of great structures of unknown origin and purpose. In Michigan State alone, tens of thousands of inscribed plates were found in 23 different counties. Other artifacts were found as people, both professional archaeologists and local residents, excavated some of the hundreds of ancient burial mounds scattered throughout the Mississippi Valley. There were many copper items found, and clay pipes, and even metal coins. And of course, thousands and thousands of spear tips and arrowheads. There are also thousands of slate and clay tablets found. Some had drawings of warfare engraved on them. For comparison, how did Mormon describe the Nephite and Lamanite armies? And when the armies of the Lamanites saw that the people of Nephi, or that Moroni, had prepared his people with breastplates and with arm shields, yea, and also shields to defend their heads, and also they were dressed with thick clothing. Now the army of Zarahemnah was not prepared with any such thing. They had only their swords and their scimitars, their bows and their arrows, their stones and their slings, and they were naked, save for a skin which was girded about their loins. This slate shows 2 opposing armies lined up facing each other. The soldiers on the left have knee-length tunics, helmets, and are armed with spears. The warriors on the right are shown barely dressed, wearing feather headdresses and armed with bows and arrows. Here's another slate showing 2 opposing armies. The group on the left has helmets and spears and carries banners. The army on the right is wearing feather headdresses and also armed with spears. Here's another slate showing 2 armies. Again, the group on the left has helmets and bows, while those on the right are wearing feather headdresses and armed with spears. Many of the artifacts have writing engraved on them. Let's look at what Mormon said about the writing the Nephites used on their records. And now behold, we have written this record according to our knowledge in the characters which are called among us the Reformed Egyptian, being handed down and altered by us, according to our manner of speech. And if our plates had been sufficiently large, we should have written in Hebrew, but the Hebrew hath been altered by us also. And if we could have written in Hebrew, behold, ye would have had no imperfection in our record. The writing on the plates is a strange combination of some Egyptian-looking characters, some Hebrew characters, and some completely unknown characters. This seems to fit the description of the Reformed Egyptian that Mormon gave when he described the record he was writing on the plates. Some scholars suggest that Joseph's knowledge about these things was limited because he had little formal education. I believe the Joseph Smith history scriptures and other testimonies that say Joseph was taught by direct revelation and by heavenly messengers regarding the history of the Book of Mormon and its importance in this last dispensation. In 1823, the ancient prophet Moroni appeared to Joseph and began to teach him in preparation to restore the true gospel and bring forth the Book of Mormon. Here are some first-hand accounts of Joseph's knowledge about the Nephites. Lucy Mack Smith noted the following, even before Joseph obtained the plates. She says, he would describe the ancient inhabitants of this continent, their dress, mode of traveling, and the animals in which they rode, their cities, their buildings, with every particular, their mode of warfare, and also the religious worship. This he would do with as much ease seemingly as if he had spent his whole life among them. From May to June 1834, approximately 230 men, women, and children marched to Missouri to help the saints who had been expelled from Jackson County, Missouri, the previous year. Joseph led a contingent from Kirtland, Ohio to Missouri. At the same time, Hiram Smith and Lyman White departed Pontiac, Michigan Territory with a group of approximately 20 individuals. During the Zion's Camp March, Joseph Smith wrote a letter to his wife Emma. It reads, in part, the whole of our journey, in the midst of so large a company of social, honest, and sincere men, wandering over the plains of the Nephites, recounting occasionally the history of the Book of Mormon, roving over the mounds of that once beloved people of the Lord, picking up their skulls and their bones as a proof of its divine authenticity. On June 2, 1834, while on Zion's Camp March, Joseph Smith Jr., along with several other men, crossed the Illinois River and camped on the west bank. The following morning, Joseph and some of the brethren visited a prominent mound on top of the bluffs overlooking the Illinois River. The brethren procured a shovel and a hoe, and removing the earth to a depth of about 1 foot, discovered the skeleton of a man almost entire, and between his ribs the stone point of a Lamanitish arrow, which evidently produced his death. Elder Burr Riggs retained the arrow. And Joseph said this, the visions of the past being opened to my understanding by the Spirit of the Almighty, I discovered that the person whose skeleton was before us was a white Lamanite, a large, thick-set man and a man of God. His name was Zelph. He was a warrior and chieftain under the great prophet Onondagas, who was known from the Hill Cumorah, or Eastern Sea, to the Rocky Mountains. He was killed in battle by the arrow found among his ribs during the last great struggle with the Lamanites and Nephites. Modern science has provided another form of evidence supporting the Nephite nation in America via DNA analysis. While DNA study is complicated, there are at least several studies which identify a mitochondrial haplogroup X that is present in very limited geographic areas. This haplogroup X DNA map shows that a significant percentage of Native Americans in the area around the Great Lakes and Canada region share haplogroup X with people living in the Middle East. Since the Nephites were destroyed, these Native Americans are likely descendants of the Lamanites, and therefore are also children of Lehi from Jerusalem. Haplogroup X does not appear in the population in Central and South America. Is there another record of the descendants of the Lamanites being Native Americans? Let's look at what the Lord has to say, as recorded in D&C 28:8. And now, behold, I say unto you that ye shall go unto the Lamanites, and preach my gospel unto them. Soon after the Book of Mormon was printed, Oliver Cowdery and others were commanded by the Lord to preach the gospel to the Lamanites. Who did they preach to? The tribes that they visited were the Cattaraugus near Buffalo, the Wyandot of Ohio, and the Delaware west of Missouri. So these missionaries went directly to the Indian tribes that have the haplogroup X DNA. Remember, haplogroup X does not exist in Central or South America. Does the Book of Mormon itself describe where the Nephites lived? In 2 Nephi we read, "But, said he, notwithstanding our afflictions, we have obtained a land of promise, a land which is choice above all other lands." Also in 2 Nephi, "And this land shall be a land of liberty unto the Gentiles, and there shall be no kings upon the land, who shall raise up unto the Gentiles." In Ether, "Behold, Ether saw the days of Christ, and he spake concerning a new Jerusalem upon this land." In 1 Nephi, "The Lord God will raise up a mighty nation among the Gentiles, yea, even upon the face of this land, and by them shall our seed be scattered." The land of promise is a choice land, a land of liberty, a land where no king shall rule over it, the land where the New Jerusalem will be built, the land where a mighty Gentile nation will exist, the land where the Lamanites are scattered by the Gentiles. Where did the Book of Mormon take place? For me, the answer has become clear and simple. Quoting L. Tom Perry, apostle of the church, "The United States is the promised land foretold in the Book of Mormon." Joseph knew. I firmly believe that Joseph Smith is the Lord's prophet of the Restoration and received revelation and direct instruction regarding the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon is the keystone of our religion. If the Book of Mormon is true, then Joseph was the prophet of God. And the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is Christ's true church on the earth today. As President Joseph Fielding Smith stated, because of the Central American theory, some members of the church have become confused and greatly disturbed in their faith in the Book of Mormon. Because of the apparent lack of physical evidence, some erroneously believe that the Book of Mormon is an allegory, no better than a fairy tale. But actually, there is abundant evidence that it is a real history as we have just seen. I believe Joseph Smith, Brigham Young, Joseph Fielding Smith, and others who state that the Book of Mormon took place in the area they say, namely America. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the information and material presented.